That the crew stopped 11 what's called go-fast vessels, speedboats, and detained 34 suspected drug traffickers. Tanner shipping business has allowed narco traffickers to take to the high seas, fueling Europe and other countries' growing appetite for cocaine. Force against some Latin American drug cartels, and just last week we saw the first few signs of that action, the U.S. deploying
312 hostages. A $950 million fortress. One of the most dangerous maritime rescues of our time. What do you do when pirates transform a handful of skiffs into a floating stronghold packed with guns, supplies, and civilian shields? The U.S. Navy had to answer that question in the Gulf of Aden, and the response wasn't just a fight, it was a test of technology, timing, and restraint. In this video we'll trace the exact steps, from the first ISR feed to the final breach. But first, how do you break a fortress at sea? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great! Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. How do fishermen in small skiffs build a fortress valued at nearly $1 billion that can hold over 300 hostages? The answer is not luck, not chance, but a systematic shift from petty raiding into a full-scale maritime industry of crime.
A record-breaking drug haul.
You gotta see it. Officials say they confiscated 61,000 pounds of cocaine, marijuana yesterday, and that's $473 million worth of drugs.
All from that seems like a small boat for all that. Fatal overdoses to 23 million people, or put another way, the entire population of Florida.
This wasn't a couple of men chasing tankers. It became an organized enterprise, with layers of logistics, supplies kept at sea, and a fortress that looked less like a pirate hideout and more like a military outpost floating in open water. At first the skiffs seemed crude, fiberglass boats, outboard engines, a two-man crew gripping an RPG or a machine gun. Fast and light, they rushed big vessels at speeds close to 40 knots, closing before defense teams could respond. A freighter spotted one, then two, then half a dozen converging like sharks. Resistance meant automatic fire streaking across the deck, or rocket-propelled grenades exploding near the bridge. Once boarded, crews had minutes before they were herded together and stripped of control. What started as hit-and-run boarding operations turned into long-term hostages held for ransom. But the pirates didn't stay scattered. They pooled resources and learned to project power far from shore. The breakthrough came when they captured supply vessels and used them as mother ships. Suddenly, their reach stretched deep into trade corridors that carried oil, grain, and manufactured goods. Each prize taken at sea became more than a payday, it was raw material feeding the construction of something larger. Containers stripped from captured vessels were stacked, welded, and transformed into a fortress. That structure was not symbolic, it was practical. It allowed them to stay weeks, even months, in international waters without touching land.
A pirate boat tries to board the vessel. And that's the response from the private security on board. But there's a second pirate boat.
All the way out! All the way out!
Picture this. Walls of steel containers lashed together, creating lanes and corners like city streets. Gun towers made from elevated stacks where machine gunners screened every approach. Choke points designed so any boarding party would walk straight into crossing arcs of fire. At the heart of this maze, hundreds of hostages crammed into makeshift holding cells, watched by armed guards who lived among them. This was not improvisation. It was engineering with intent. The pirates had forged a floating labyrinth of steel. And that labyrinth was lethal. On radar, the fortress looked like just another cargo cluster, but approach within range and you faced fortified emplacements that turned open sea into a gauntlet. The pirates shaped the environment to give them the defensive edge, obstacles, barriers, locked corridors, overlapping positions where one gunner's blind spot was another's kill zone. International waters, once free, became a sovereign zone cut off from law. State navies tracking them knew the price of error. Any strike with heavy weapons could kill civilians packed into the center compartments. Any prolonged blockade could trigger executions or provoke retaliation on passing vessels. This fortress was more than engineering, it was a psychological weapon. Crews across the world heard stories of hostages trapped in its corridors. From the deck of a passing tanker, the idea of being dragged inside those steel walls was enough to make many surrender without resistance. Billions in trade routes were placed under strain. Insurance costs skyrocketed, and shipping lanes that connected continents felt like ambush corridors. This was piracy scaled into strategy. Meanwhile, the pirates refined their rules of pressure. Hostages were rarely held in a single group. They were split and scattered through the structure, kept in separate compartments so rescue attempts would never free everyone at once. The fortress itself became leverage, with walls designed as bargaining chips. Strike one area, and the threat was clear, the lives in that section would be the first lost. For navies tasked with response, the puzzle was brutal. Every attack scenario looked like a trap doubling as a hostage execution plan. The effect on the regional balance couldn't be ignored. Neighboring states faced destabilization as arms and ransoms fed local actors on shore. Allowing the fortress to persist meant ceding control of key waterways to a criminal state within a state. Yet forcing the issue risked escalation not only in the Gulf, but across regional lines where allies and rivals shifted forces in response. This was the stage the U.S. Navy entered. They assessed the fortress not as pirates hiding behind hostages, but as a hardened enemy compound. That shift mattered. It meant surveillance nets were deployed, data was layered on ship movements, heat signatures, ammo stockpiles. Every angle was mapped before a shot was fired. For the Navy, it wasn't enough to sink a structure, it required intelligence, timing, and precision to dismantle it without sacrificing the lives trapped inside. This wasn't a raid on sea bandits, it was a siege on a fortress. What begins as fishermen in skiffs ends as architects of a billion-dollar prison afloat in one of the world's busiest trade arteries. And with every container welded into place, the pirates built not strength but a trap of their own making. Because what they constructed at sea would soon be treated as a military target. And that set the stage for a phased operation where the hunters became the hunted. A billion-dollar fortress fell. Not from raw firepower, but from a combination of intelligence, timing, and discipline. The pirates built walls of steel, but those walls became their cage when precision closed in from every side. Piracy thrived on fear, on the image of hostages swallowed by a floating labyrinth. But intimidation cracked once it met patience and restraint. In the end, their empire at sea collapsed under its own weight. The sea does not belong to the reckless. It belongs to those who respect its laws. Subscribe and join a community that seeks to understand the realities of modern conflict.